Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan Hand. Chapter 19. I think someone's outside, said Kia. Someone? Come on, Kia. You can only mean Jason fucking Voorhees, everyone was thinking. In frantic desperation, Will tried everything he could to wake Lori. If Jason found them before they could wake her, they might have to leave her here. No, he couldn't think like that. Will looked over at Kia. She was doing good, but Linderman? Lori ran screaming from the shambolic butchery of her parents' bedroom and fled down the hall, her soul crushed by the sound of her dad's sobbing coming from the murder scene she'd just left behind. Suddenly she was flat on her face. The floor was rippling, undulating, an unnatural motion that had ripped her off her feet. Krueger was having no such problems keeping his balance. He walked in an almost leisurely manner behind her, then grabbed her by the hair. Before she had time to react, Lori had been pulled agonizingly to her feet, then flung into the thick glass of an upstairs window. The pane cracked and smashed as she bounced off it and fell to the floor, her face and arms now a mess of cuts and bruises. Krueger was tossing her about like a rag doll. They were all the same, these fucking teenagers, with their droopy doe eyes and their pathetic sense of self-importance. The problem with these girls was when they reach the age when they become all maternal. They just got in the way. They forced themselves between me and the real girls that I want to play with. The cute girls. The children. He looked forward to playing around with little girls again. But first he had to deal with this sanctimonious, brooding slut. Lori lay on the hallway floor. No energy left. No strength. The pain. No fight. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her along the floor, putting her just where he wanted her, so that he could smack this bitch up once and for all. Lori, no! Will almost fell back in shock. Lori was moving across the floor. Her body had jerked and started sliding, as if someone was pulling her along on invisible strings. It wasn't possible. Even if Krueger was somehow attacking her in her dreams, how did that explain this? What was pulling her in the real world? Oh, God! Cuts suddenly appeared on Lori's arms and chest, and she began to writhe in pain. Will didn't know what to do. Linderman was no use. Kia, she hadn't noticed. She'd been too busy watching the window, where she thought she saw Jason a second ago. Kia backed away from the grimy sheet of glass. Something was moving outside, she was sure of it. There! Not the window now, but through gaps between the boards that made up the cabin wall, a glimpse of the white hockey mask. There! A glint of machete in the moonlight. "It's him!" she shouted, in no doubt now. "He's here now!" Good timing. The plank wall exploded as Jason hurled his mask through the aged, rotted wood. Debris filled the room, showering Will and Lori with dust, dirt, and bits of broken wooden pieces. One of the shattered planks landed against the kerosene lamp. The lamp fell and broke against the floor. Almost immediately, the floor of the recreation hall was set on fire. The room was filled with debris, and old bric-a-brac, all nice and dry, all perfect fuel for a bonfire. Linderman and Kia scattered, but despite his earlier fears, Will would not leave Lori's side. Jason looked in at the four of them, then made his move. The impassive, murderous bastard carved forward for the kill when Will whipped the police revolver out from his belt and let loose some point-blank, cordite action. The first slug hit Jason in the shoulder. The second spat a chunk of dead meat out of Jason's chest. Jason lashed out with his machete, catching the gun. Will, eager to keep his hand, quickly let go of the revolver and looked on in anguish as the gun was sent flying through the air and out through the collapsed wall that Jason had demolished. Jason took a second swing. A downward stroke that was sure to disembowel Laurie, were it not for Will, who dived in the way of the machete, and heroically took a glancing blow right across the side of his own ribcage. Will cried out and clutched at his side. His fingers could feel the soft flesh that had separated on both sides of the meat-chopping machete gash. He was cut real bad, and he was bleeding. Laurie was finished. It was all over. She lay on the hallway floor, her eyes closed. She was trembling. She had no skills for this. She wasn't trained, and it was in his world with all his rules. The great plan had gone wrong. She was supposed to wake up, bring him out, and let Jason Voorhees deal with him, but Krueger had drowned the deformed boy and Laurie hadn't woken up. And just to add the final touch, Freddy had shown her that he himself had killed Laurie's mom. Bastard! Freddy stepped forward, then dropped to kneel over her, one leg on either side of her bloody, prostrate form. "Welcome to my world, bitch!" This was the end. He leaned forward, breathing heavily. The stench of decay and burning coming off of him must have been what hell smelled like. Bastard! "I should warn you, princess." He stroked her leg with one of his razored fingers, the sharp tip of the blade leaving just enough of a line so as not to break the skin. He lifted her nightgown, and now chose to slice a tiny cut on her inner thigh. "The first time, tends to be a little messy." "Bastard!" Laurie cried out and knotted the frayed hem of Krueger's fucked up red and green sweater in her fists. This was all she had left. This was her last chance. Will waited for the second machete blow, anything he could do to protect Laurie. "Get away from them!" Linderman. Ignoring the command, Jason raised his machete over Will and Laurie. But Linderman's threat wasn't mere desperate bravado. He and Kia had grabbed both sides of a heavy wooden table. Quickly, ignoring the fires spreading around them, they ran forward with the table and flung it into place over Will and Laurie, just as the machete came down. 2 inches of solid oak were all that came between Will and bloody machete death. Immediately, Jason tried to pull the weapon free, but it wouldn't budge, and Jason soon found himself lifting both the machete and the table it had wedged into off the floor. Linderman and Kia hadn't finished with him yet. Fueled by fear and adrenaline, the two of them had found a couple of makeshift weapons and were now charging straight at him. This was their moment, now, while Jason hadn't got the machete free. Kia jumped on the very table Jason was struggling with and smacked him again and again around the side of the head with a boat paddle. She hit him on each syllable. "Back your motherfucking broke ass up!" Not enough. Kia did not know who she was dealing with. She didn't know at all. Jason swept a casual backhanded blow at Kia and knocked her off the table and clear across the room, which was the signal for Linderman to enter the fray. Linderman really didn't want to be here. In fact, he'd rather be anywhere than here. In fact, he'd rather eat a steaming bowl of dog shit than be standing here right now. Here in front of this unstoppable freak of insanity. The same freak who'd nearly killed Linderman twice already, and with the same fucking machete. But this was surely their last stand. Laurie was unconscious. Will was wounded. Kia had just gone down. Linderman was the only one who could stop Jason now. He'd found a flagpole, an old moth-eaten Stars and Stripes still attached, and was now holding the pole in both hands like a spear. If he played his cards right, he could jab Jason, maybe stab him while keeping him at pole's length. Once, got him. Twice, speared him again. But both blows had all but rebounded off of Jason, merely knocking him back a slight bit. Jason didn't seem to care. He was only being delayed in his single-minded efforts to retrieve the machete buried in the tabletop above Will and Laurie. This didn't worry Linderman. Given enough time, he could probably... Jason yanked the machete free, causing the table to lurch up off the ground and sending Jason's arm swinging back through the air unexpectedly with released momentum, catching Linderman by accident. Linderman was only a skinny kid. When the back of Jason's forearm crashed into him, he was flung back away from the fight and sent slamming into the far wall. Linderman couldn't see it, but a rusty nail stuck out from the wall. The nail cut through his skin and pierced the teenager's kidney. He groaned and sank to the floor. The fire had now taken hold of much of the recreation hall, and the room was becoming thick with smoke. Jason stood upright amid the billowing flames. He held the machete in his hand. The four friends were beaten. If not dead, they soon would be. It was good to be home. Will was bleeding badly from his wound, but Laurie still hadn't come round, and the place was on fire. Ever since the table had covered them up, Will had rested, tried to save up some energy. He'd heard the fighting. He'd heard the shouts and cries of his friends, but he had no idea how things stood or where Jason... Shit! The fire! They had to get away from the fire. Sluggish, weak, bleeding, Will grabbed Laurie and started to drag her out from under the table. He had to get her out of there, get her to safety. No! Too late. He noticed a small piece of burning debris slip from the roof of the cabin, and it was falling toward Laurie. Normally, a chunk of wood that size wouldn't be big enough to cause any harm, but it was on fucking fire. Will tried to pull Laurie out of the way, but even before he started the attempt, he knew it would fail. The blazing fragment landed on Laurie's arm. Laurie screamed from the burn. She shrieked in pain and terror. In her house on Elm Street, where she still had that bastard Krueger sweater wrapped up in her arms. Laurie screamed from the burn. She shrieked in pain and terror. In the burning recreation hall, where she woke up, still holding on to that bastard Krueger sweater in her arms. Will couldn't believe his eyes. It was all true. Freddy Krueger, here. Everything she'd said, everything Mark had said, and his brother Bobby, true, all of it true. Freddy was still crouched over Laurie, his glove raised for the kill. Die, bitch! This wasn't Elm Street. This wasn't her dream. Where? Krueger turned around and saw Will looking back at him. He took in the building they were in, derelict, a cabin, and the flames everywhere. And then Freddy looked up, right into the hockey-masked eyes of Jason Voorhees. Chapter 20. Jason towered over Krueger and the girl. On seeing Krueger, Jason's eyes shone with recognition. He tightened his grip on the machete. This is the one who had fooled him. This is the one who had tried to drown him. This is the one who had tried to use him. This is the one who made him feel afraid. Only this time, Jason's enemy was real. This wasn't some boiler room with pipes and torrents of water. The little man wouldn't be able to throw him around this time. This was no dream. This was real, and the little man would die. Fire ate its way across the dry floorboards. Will pulled Laurie out from under Krueger while the dream assassin was preoccupied with Voorhees. Will held her tight. They were cut off from Kia and Linderman by the flames. Well, this was Laurie's plan. This was what they'd worked for, what they might even die for. Will took one look at them. Jason, tall, powerful, and mobile. Freddy, crouched, snarling, malevolent. They hated each other. Freddy versus Jason, announced Laurie, sensing the oncoming mayhem. Place your bets. Freddy clambered slowly to his feet, never once taking his eyes off of his enemy. This was completely unexpected. Krueger was wary, sizing Jason up.
"Well, go on,"
he growled.
"Grunt something, you retarded mute! Show me what you got!"
Jason strode forward through the flame and swung down hard with his machete. Freddy pressed back against one of the cabin walls and twisted aside, easily dodging the blow. The machete sunk into the wall.
"You think I'm afraid of you now that we're in the real world? Ha 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 ha!"
laughed Freddy. Jason swung the machete again, sideways this time, but Freddy jumped back, causing the blade to barely miss his chest.
"You're slow, you're stupid, and you ain't got no style."
Thank God, Laurie was awake now. There was no time to talk. Laurie only had to take a look around to see how things had moved on since she'd taken the tranquilizer. They had to act on instinct now. Laurie saw the hole in the wall Jason had made when he first battered his way into the hall. She began to lead her wounded friend in that direction, but Freddy saw this and danced past Jason's third machete swing to block their way. A sudden inrush of air caused the flames to erupt. Laurie and Will screamed. The tatty old curtains caught fire. Flame rushed up all three of the remaining wooden walls, and the sudden burst of heat caused Kia to fall back. She'd barely climbed to her feet when the inferno roared with this renewed ferocity. As she stumbled away from the flame, Kia could see Linderman lying at the rear of the hall. He looked dazed. Quickly, she hurried over to him and helped him to his feet. She didn't notice the dark stain spreading across the back of his thin jacket. Laurie caught sight of her friends across the room through the sheets of flame. She shouted at the top of her voice, "Kia!" But there was no way they could meet up inside the hall. There was too much fire between them, and the room was filling up with smoke, making it impossible to breathe. So Laurie led Will in the direction of the front door. It was still held closed by the plank that Linderman had wedged in place. Together they grabbed hold of the makeshift bolt and tried to lift it. Will grimaced with pain, but was able to make the difference. The plank lifted and they pushed through the door and out to safety. On the other side of the hall, Kia helped Linderman out through a side door. Like Will and Laurie before them, the two of them doubled up and coughed as soon as they hit the fresh air, almost retching from the smoke that they'd inhaled. Freddy was infuriated to see Will and Laurie escape, but he would catch up with the brats soon enough. Right now, he had other things on his mind. Jason swung a diagonal downstroke with the machete, but Freddy snatched the deadly blade between the lethal fingers of his razor glove, trapping the machete long enough for Freddy to plant a hefty kick slam in the center of Jason's groin. No reaction.
"No balls, huh, Voorhees?"
Jason used his free hand to grab Krueger by the front of his striped sweater, then shoved Krueger's head through a window, the first in a series of windows that ran down the length of the hall. Jason then proceeded to drag Freddy sideways through the charred wood panel wall, crashing Freddy's face through one window after the next. Then, when they reached the end of the wall, he let Freddy fall to the ground. "Who's laughing now, Krueger?" Jason picked Freddy up again, but this time holding him high in both arms. Then he tossed the stunned Dream Demon out of the building. In Jason's powerful arms, Freddy was a piece of nothing. He flew through the open air before crashing through the roof of what used to be the camp's administration building. But Jason hadn't finished. In fact, he'd only just begun. Last time they'd faced off, it had been on Krueger's terms, but there was room for only one murderous maniac in Crystal Lake. He took a step forward onto the porch, intending to go after Krueger's broken body, but was blocked by a sudden collapse of fiery debris. Linderman clutched at the wound in his side. Kia was helping him to get away, but each footstep on the ground sent pain shooting through his torso. Kia noticed his reaction, saw how he gripped his back, and how his hand was covered in blood. "Jesus, you're hurt," she said, concerned. He tried to smile, but his face was white as a sheet. "Don't worry about me. Just a scratch." He couldn't go any further. He lowered himself against a tree trunk, half sitting, nearly falling to the ground. "I'm gonna just rest here for a second." He sounded weary, his voice fading almost to a whisper. "Linderman, I'm fine, Kia," he interrupted. He saw the deep concern in her face. "Really? Now get out of here. Go get help." Kia wasn't convinced. "But, just go. He was right. He needed professional help. She had to get someone. Okay, she relented. "I'll be back as soon as I can." At that, she turned around to leave and then stopped. "You were really brave in there, Linderman," she said, trying to reassure him. "Charlie," he whispered. "My first name's Charlie." All this time they'd known each other, and they were connecting now? Kia knelt down beside him and gently took hold of his shoulders. "Then listen up, Charlie. You better fucking be here when I get back." "Why?" "So I can kick your ass if you tell anyone I did this." She kissed Linderman on the lips, long and hot. Awesome. Linderman looked at her, smiling, as she rose and dashed off into the woods. He couldn't believe it. All their arguing. He winced in pain and pulled his hand away from the wound. There was blood. Too much blood. Linderman knew it was bad. He'd known since he hit the nail on the wall. But he didn't want Kia to see it. Kia. Lovely Kia. God, she was gorgeous. Linderman smiled. Despite it all, as the darkness came down, Charlie Linderman was a happy guy. Happier than he'd ever been. And as he closed his eyes and let his head slump down to one side, Linderman remained happy for the last few seconds of his life. "We have to go find the others," said Laurie, concerned. She looked to Will, to his bleeding side. "Can you walk?" she asked. "I can try," he replied through gritted teeth. Carefully, Laurie helped Will to his feet. Then she quickly surveyed the scene, the whole camp now brightly lit by the blazing recreation hall. She saw a small rowing boat moored down by the floating pier. "There's a boat!" She put an arm around Will's side and they headed off. They needed to find Kia and Linderman. Then they needed to get the hell out of here. And then let Jason and Freddy knock 7 shades of shit out of each other. Kia could only think of Linderman as she crept through the trees surrounding Camp Crystal Lake. Would he be all right on his own? Would Freddy or Jason find... What was that? She paused, thought she'd heard a noise, but nothing. So she carried on, and in a short while she could see out, through a gap in the trees, to the lakeside. She could see Will and Laurie moving toward the shore of the lake. Laurie was helping Will over in the direction of the pier. Kia smiled with relief. They were still alive, and was about to call out to them when she saw Freddy Krueger leap out of the woods from behind them, his claw raised ready to slice through Will's neck. "Freddy!" shouted Kia. Laurie and Will stopped and looked back in panic. So did Freddy. Krueger began to stalk over to her. He licked his lips.
"How sweet! Dark meat!
Bastard!" That crack infuriated Kia. But straight away she sensed that it was meant to. He was trying to make her lose her cool when she needed it most. She'd met guys like him before, and she knew just how to deal with them. She stepped out of the cover of the wood and looked at him like he was nothing. "So you're the one everyone's afraid of?" she jibed. "What kind of faggot runs around in a floppy hat and a Christmas sweater? Please! Your mama knit that? Or was she too busy sucking off the local football team?" Krueger stopped smiling. Now he came at her. Kia, letting Laurie and Will sneak away behind him. Oh, you're so scary." Laurie knew what this was all about and mouthed silent thanks to her friend. She just hoped that Kia would do the right thing and get out of there, which was the last thing on Kia's mind right now. "And let's talk about that face of yours," she shouted at the oncoming killer. You take a look at yourself lately, 'cause honey, I flushed better looking things than you down my toilet. His devastated face was contorted with rage. Freddy was heading directly for her. I mean, get real. You're not even scary. She wriggled her fingers in a mockery of the deadly glove. And what's with the butter knives? You trying to compensate for something? Maybe coming up a little short between the legs? I mean, you've got these teensy-weensy things. She curled her fingers and wriggled them again. And Jason's got this big old She held her hands wide apart, as if measuring out the machete in the air. Freddy Krueger stopped. Kia had been ready to run at the last second, but now he'd stopped. He was just staring at her. She hadn't expected this. What? She wondered aloud. No, Krueger wasn't staring at Kia at all. He was staring at something behind her. Eyes full of fear, Kia turned and whack! Jason's machete hacked down into Kia's chest with such force that after crushing her entire sternum into her lungs, the blow sent her stumbling back through the air until she slammed hard into a tree. That wasn't the sound of branches breaking. It was the sound of Kia's back, broken, impaled, dead. Kia's corpse crumpled to the ground.
KIA!
Sniggered Freddy.
Killed in action!
Lori screamed. She had just seen her best friend slaughtered, hacked to fuck by Jason Voorhees. Aching, weak, Will grabbed her arm and tried to pull her away in the direction of the boat. Come on, Lori, let's go. We can't help her anymore. Very practical, very rational, but the wrong answer. Lori shook Will off. Change of plan. Lori was through crying. She was through with being a victim of these bastards. No, she shook her head. I'm staying. Will reacted as if Lori had slapped him hard across the face. Are you crazy? He yelled. You got what you wanted, Lori. You pulled Freddy out and Jason's fighting him. What more do you want? He killed my mother, Will. It was Freddy. My dad covered it up to protect me. He didn't do it! For a moment, Will was lost. What was she saying? Krueger killed her mom? Then he remembered what Mark had said about his brother's so-called suicide. Mark said Freddy had killed Bobby. Bobby didn't commit suicide. What if Lori was right? What if... He got it. Typical of this bastard. Get people thinking the wrong thing. Spread chaos, panic, fear. Play people off against one another. That's the Krueger way. In just the same way Krueger had torn Elm Street apart all those years ago, when he was nothing but a child killing nobody. I know that now, sighed Will. Look, she said. Freddy's taken everything from us. He ruined both of our pasts. And he had. Whether Will understood it or not, whether he knew it or not, Krueger had always been there, like a cancer festering in the background, ruining all their lives. Whether they'd lost their moms, whether they'd been locked away in an institution, whether they had lost their friends or fought with their parents. At the end of the day, it had all been Freddy Krueger. Freddy fucking Krueger. The fire from the burning camp was reflected in Lori's eyes, but the heat of the flames was nothing compared to the rage she felt within. Her mom, her dad, Gib, Kia. Lori stood up, looked across at Freddy and said, I'm not leaving until I see him die. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 19 and 20 of Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan Hand. Only one upload to go before this one's over. The next upload will be the conclusion of this story. And wow, I've really enjoyed this one. We've knocked it out really fast. It's been a great read. And as always, I really enjoyed these two chapters. These scenes are awesome scenes from the movie, especially when Freddy wakes up and sees Jason standing there. I've been using music from the Freddy movies and the Jason movies and not so much from the Freddy vs. Jason movie, but I had to use that music because it's just perfect for that scene when Freddy wakes up and he sees Jason standing there and the fight starts. And I always thought that Kane could have done it better than Ken in this scene, and the book really drives that home. The fact that when Jason looks down and all of a sudden Freddy's there, this guy that had hurt him, had almost killed him, had made him feel fear, had tried to drown him. You know, all that hate and rage in the book just really puts you in Jason's mind, and he's just 100% rage, you know. I would have loved to see Kane do that, because Ken didn't really portray that as much as I think Kane would have. But man, awesome scene. I thought the book did great on that scene. God, I feel so bad for Linderman just as much as I did whenever I saw the movie. I felt like he didn't have to die, but I get it. They got to get that body count up. But at least him and Kia had, you know, like a little moment there. And I was a little more happy for the Kia in the book to go out like a badass, you know, mouthing off to Freddy, and than I was in the movie. In the movie, it just made me cringe. But I guess it's because of the actress. But in the book, reading it was different since I didn't have to see her doing it. Maybe my performance was cringy, but that's the best I could do for Kia. But if I was just reading it without recording, I would have been rooting for her more in the book than I did in the movie. I love Freddy's inner thoughts in this book, and it's like if we haven't had it driven home yet that we should be rooting for Jason and not Freddy, which is already obvious, the book goes into Freddy's head, and he's like thinking, once I kill off this bitch and these other teenagers, I'm going to be able to start going back to playing with the children again. And you know, that line is like, yeah, we know he's a child killer, child molester, whatever, but geez, man, we already know that. It's like the book just had to give us one little extra thing to hate Freddy for and root for Jason, it felt like. But I've always rooted for Jason, you know. Freddy's funny in some of the movies, and you know, I really enjoy the Freddy movies, but if it did come down for a fight, I'd be rooting for Jason, just because. But there was actually quite a few differences. Not huge differences, mind you, but did y'all notice the few little slight differences in the book than from the movie? I'm curious to see if anybody can hit me up in the comment section below and name off like 2 or 3 little differences from the movie that were in these 2 chapters tonight. I can't wait to hear from you and see if you caught them. I'm really looking forward to the conclusion of this, but yeah, really enjoyed tonight's chapter. I love how you know, Freddy thinks he's got her beat, and that fire starts burning her, and yeah. Felt so bad for Linderman, as I said. He gets thrown into that wall, gets injured, dies. Man, I hate seeing Linderman go. But it's time for the final showdown. Here we go. Next upload is the conclusion of Freddy vs. Jason. Let me know what you thought of tonight's chapters, if you noticed those little differences. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and
Pleasant dreams!
Hi, this is Jeffrey Reddick, creator of Final Destination.
Greetings, Slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books, the Bard's Blood horror Shakespeare books.
Hey guys, this is Jason Brooks, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Vengeance.
Hey, this is Slasher Pepper.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 6.
This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris.
Hi, this is Deborah Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5.
Hey folks, this is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa.
Hello kiddies, this is John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet.
And you are listening.
You're listening.
And you're listening.
And you're listening.
Just want to make sure you guys know you're listening.
You are listening.
And you are listening.
And you are lucky enough to be listening.
Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening.
You are listening
to the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
The 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian. Keep listening, or I'll kill you.